The video that spread across the internet didn't start with laughter, shouting, or confrontation. It started with silence, the kind of silence that makes people uneasy, the kind that tells you something irreversible has already happened. A busy street in the Philippines stood unnaturally still. Traffic paused mid-motion, phones frozen in raised hands, and at the center of it all stood a group of tourists who only hours earlier had been laughing loudly, mocking what they called unnecessary rules and exaggerated discipline. They didn't understand why no one was responding anymore, why the smiles were gone, why the air itself felt heavier. This is where the story truly begins, not at the joke, not at the mockery, but at the moment confidence collapsed into confusion, because discipline here doesn't announce consequences. It delivers them quietly, methodically, and without emotion. Before this silence, there was noise, plenty of it. The tourists arrived with cameras already, recording, narrating their experience as if the country itself were a backdrop meant to entertain their audience. They joked about how orderly everything seemed, how people waited in perfect lines without complaint, how rules were posted everywhere and actually followed. To them, it looked excessive, almost laughable, like a society taking itself too seriously. They laughed at volunteers who politely guided foot traffic, mocked commuters who stepped aside to let others pass, and rolled their eyes at signs reminding people to wait, stand, stop, and move in sequence. In their minds, discipline meant weakness, and obedience meant lack of individuality. What they didn't realize was that what they were witnessing wasn't control. It was cooperation. A system refined over decades where millions of people learned that shared order was the only way everyone could move forward. The city they walked through was already awake long before sunrise, vendors aligning their stalls with quiet, precision, jeepneys stopping exactly where they were supposed to, commuters flowing through stations like water guided by invisible channels. Nothing about it was accidental. Every movement, every pause, every line existed because chaos was expensive and discipline saved lives. When the tourists stepped into this rhythm, they didn't blend in. They disrupted it. They cut lines casually, stepping ahead of people who had been waiting patiently. They ignored pedestrian signals, laughing as they crossed anyway. They spoke loudly in places where quiet was understood as respect, filming faces without permission, narrating sarcastically about how serious everyone seemed. Locals noticed immediately, not with anger, not with confrontation, but with exchanged glances and subtle pauses. In a disciplined society, disorder doesn't need to be challenged loudly. It becomes visible on its own. The system didn't react because it didn't need to. Cameras continued recording. Schedules continued tracking. Reports continued logging. Discipline here wasn't enforced by shouting or threats, but by memory. At first, the tourists felt untouchable. When a volunteer gently asked them to move to the correct lane, they laughed and stayed put. When a conductor pointed to posted rules, they turned the camera on him instead. Their videos went online almost instantly, edited with playful music and sarcastic captions, framed as harmless travel humor. Views climbed quickly. Comments flooded in. Some laughed along, others warned them to be careful, explaining that rules in the Philippines weren't suggestions. Those warnings were dismissed as overreactions. What could really happen over a joke, a shortcut, a little rule breaking? What they didn't see was how every small action was being recorded, not emotionally, but procedurally. Missed connections were noted. IDs were scanned. Timestamps were attached. In a system built on cooperation, disruption leaves a footprint. And enough footprints form a trail. The first consequence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like inconvenience. A ride they expected never arrived. A permit they assumed was routine stalled without explanation. Offices that processed others efficiently suddenly moved slower for them. They blamed bureaucracy, complaining loudly, mocking inefficiency online, unaware that the same discipline they ridiculed was the reason everything usually worked. In the Philippines, discipline creates reliability, and reliability creates access. Lose reliability, and nothing dramatic happens. Doors don't slam shut. Voices don't rise. Services simply stop prioritizing you. As days passed, their tone shifted. Sarcasm turned sharp. Jokes turned defensive. They accused the city of being unfriendly, of punishing outsiders, of being overly strict. What they didn't understand was that the rules applied equally to everyone, locals included. Equality feels like hostility only when you expect exception. Each complaint they filed added context. Each interaction filled in the picture. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't nationalism. This was accountability, functioning exactly as designed. The turning point came during a large public event meant to showcase cooperation at scale. Roads closed with perfect timing. Volunteers guided thousands of people calmly through narrow spaces. Barriers existed not to restrict freedom, but to prevent disaster. Chasing a better camera angle, the tourists crossed into a restricted area, laughing as they did, mocking how serious everything was. Within moments, the flow of people adjusted around them, isolating them in an unnatural pocket of stillness. That silence returned. Security approached without urgency, without anger, without spectacle. Requests were made calmly. IDs were taken professionally. Explanations were delivered slowly and clearly. The tourists tried humor. Humor didn't work. They tried negotiation. Negotiation didn't apply. Cameras went down. What followed wasn't dramatic. No shouting, no public embarrassment, just paperwork, rules read aloud, fines calculated based on posted regulations, access quietly revoked, future permits flagged for review. Discipline didn't humiliate them. It aligned consequences with actions. Online, the earlier clips resurfaced, now stitched with explanations from locals who broke down why those rules existed, how discipline prevented stampedes, accidents, and tragedies, how order saved lives during emergencies. The narrative flipped almost overnight. Viewers who once laughed began questioning the tourists' entitlement. Sponsors distanced themselves. Collaborations paused. The consequences spread outward, not through outrage, but through understanding. Inside the system, the case closed quietly. No press conference, no announcement, no celebration. The city simply resumed its rhythm. That restraint was the final lesson. Discipline doesn't seek validation. Months later, one of the tourists returned alone, without cameras, without an audience. This time, they queued. They waited. They read signs. They watched how patience created flow, how calm created efficiency. The city felt different, not because it had changed, but because they had. Officials later explained that nothing unusual had occurred. Rules existed to keep people safe, to make shared spaces work for millions. Discipline wasn't about obedience. It was about mutual respect. The story endured because people recognized themselves in it. Everyone has felt the urge to cut corners, to mock rules that slow them down. Watching consequences unfold without cruelty challenged that instinct. Maybe discipline wasn't the enemy of freedom. Maybe it was the structure that made freedom usable. Critics called the response strict. Supporters called it fair. But both sides agreed on one thing. The system worked. Streets stayed open. Events ran safely. Life continued. The tourists' original videos remain online, now followed by apologies instead of punchlines. Discipline didn't chase them. It outlasted them. When mockery faded, structure remained, quietly keeping millions safe. And if this is your first time watching, and you want more documentary stories like this, stories that go deeper than headlines and reveal how unseen systems shape real consequences, make sure you subscribe now so you don't miss the next one.